Hello everyone, Daniel Yuck here. Today I'm going to be sharing with you all how I go about shading a tattoo. Let's get right on into this. Where I'm going to start off is by saying that we can shade with any size needle that we are comfortable with. So if it's a round mag, if it's a round liner, round shader, as long as we know what results we are going to achieve with the tools that we are choosing to pick, I think that that is the best way to approach it. Make sure that we know what we are going to achieve and how we're going to achieve it, why we're using the tools that we are using. For this instance, I'm going to be using a Quelle bug pin 3-round liner because I want to be more precise with where I put my shading, as this is a smaller design. So it doesn't matter what tool you choose to use on your end, you could still apply the fundamentals that I'm about to share with you all to the setup that you are using on your end. So when it comes to shading, and I'm using again a Quelle bug pin 3-round liner, sorry for my hair being in the way here, I want to use the very tips of my needles, and typically when I'm shading I'm always using the tips of my needles, whether it's a round mag, and even when I'm lining, now that I think about it, I'm always working off of the very tips of my needles. And I just want to confirm, reiterate, and point that out to you all. I'm not digging into the skin, I'm simply working off the very tips of my needles. Taking a closer look right here, you can see that I'm using brush-like motions where I'm simply brushing over the very top layers of the skin. I'm not penetrating as I would if I'm applying a line or packing black or color, something to that extent. What I'm doing is I'm using the very tips of my needles to brush lightly over the skin. And what I'm doing is I'm using these movements to create layers of black there, as you see that I'm stacking over one another to go ahead and have darker in some areas, lighter in some areas, hence shading. So what I'm doing is I'm essentially building the shading with the very tips of my needles using brush like motions. We can use the same sort of motions if we're using, let's say, round shaders or round mags. It'll be the same approach essentially, where we're using the tips of our needles and doing brush like motions. However, what does change is where we are putting the shading and how the shading looks. For me, I wanted a peppered look, and as you see right here real close, you can see the dots actually layering over one another, and you can see it start creating a sort of shaded look there. So again, it depends on what you as the artist are going for. Switching over to a different angle, you're gonna see here that I'm still approaching it the exact same way. I'm still creating these soft brush-like motions over the very top layers of the skin, and I'm just layering dots essentially over one another to give us that shaded type of look. Granted, each needle that we use, let's say if you're using a round shader, you're gonna get similar results but still different. If you're using a round mag, you're gonna get similar results but still different. The tattoo machine that I'm using for this tattoo right here is the Dragonhawk Fold. I'm also using the Dragonhawk wireless power supply. I will also leave links for those in the description below. As you can see right here, not only am I going in one direction, but I'm also using the brush motions to go up and down as well. So not only am I going right to left, I'm also going up and down. I do use these crosshatch like motions to go ahead and smooth out the shading as well. So that's what I'm doing right here in this part of the video. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to brush around the areas that I'm not going to shade into. So what I'm doing is I'm using the very tips of my needle just to create a fine line there, or a faint little shade there, so that way I don't shade past that point. I do want the natural skin from the nose shining under that line right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to proceed to kind of just shade the entire nose until I am happy with the results. I am going to make an entirely different video and talk about where I decide to put shading. However, talking about that in one video and trying to explain how I shade are two completely different things. So I'm going to make one video dedicated to how I go about shading, talking about the application and approach. And then what else I'm going to do is make another video and I'm going to talk about the thought process and logic behind where I put the shading. So I've talked about my approach and working off the tips of my needles. I want to talk about the spacing in between each brush motion. So as you see, I'm still working off the very tip of my needle, still creating those brush-like motions. However, also notice the spacing in between each brush-like motion. So I have very little gaps in between each whip when I'm pulling these brush-like motions. And as you can see, it looks like one cohesive, consistent shade. I'm going to repeat that process until I've achieved the results that I'm looking for. And as you see right here, the spacing in between each whip-like motion is very minimal. So I'm going to achieve a nice, clean, consistent shading there. It's going to look like a nice gradient shade over a peppered look. And I'm able to achieve these smoother results because I'm matching my hand speed with the voltage as well. I'm using the Dragonhawk Fold at 8 volts. I'm using the Dragonhawk wireless power supply with the Quelle bug bug pen 3-round liner. So when I align those variables and with this specific technique, I'm able to achieve these specific results. If I was running, say, at about 5 volts, then I'm going to get a more of a pepper styled look. Here is a closer view at the brush whip-like motions that I am making, as well as the spacing that I am applying in between each motion there. And as you can see, there's very minimal. My idea is, again, I want the shading to look cohesive and consistent. I don't want there to be any patches in between the shading there. I want it to look nice and cohesive all the way through across upon reading it at a glance or at a distance. As you see, when I wipe up, I'm achieving those results. But again, just to recap, I'm working off the very tips of my needles. I'm running at 8 volts. I'm using a Quelle bug pen 3-round liner, and I am simply creating these whip-like motions until I've achieved the desired results. Allow me to show you another thing up close here, and as you see, what I am doing is I'm using different whip and brush motions to create shading as well. So I'm cross-hatching over the areas that I've already shaded, and again, nothing has changed. I'm still using the very tips of my needles. However, what did change was the direction that I was applying the technique in. Here's another important thing here. Now, to prevent my designs from going flat, what I like to do is leave some natural skin showing. So as you see, I created a barrier in which I didn't want to shade past, and I'm using that barrier that I created to work from, as you see right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to continue to build these shadings until I've received, or achieved rather, the desired results. Another thing that I want to point out here is, as you can see, I'm shading right over the details, right over the face of this design right here. But notice how the ink seems to be a bit more runny. I am using a gray wash, or a lighter gray wash here from Dynamic, and that is the reason why I am going over that area. I wanted to point that out and show you that here, simply because I remember when I first started, I was very scared to take this approach to kind of shade over nice details that I've already done. Having a good understanding of the results that you're going to obtain using the tools that you choose to use on your end is crucial, and that's pretty much going to bridge the gap and allow you to go ahead and fluidly work with the tools that you choose to use. Now for me, as you see, I'm applying shading again in a pretty sensitive area. I'm applying it to her forehead right there, as you see, over the eyebrows, over the eyelashes, everything right there. And I'm doing that with confidence because I understand the results that I'm going to achieve by doing so. Shading in general can be pretty daunting, so this snippet right here, you see me going crazy with the shading. Even doing something like this with shading would have terrified me when I first started. I wouldn't even have thought that I would have been applying shading correctly. However, what changes are the variables when we start aligning everything, such as the machines that we are using, our hand speed, our voltage, our needle depth, the needle size, the needle configuration that we are using with the proper inks. When all of these become aligned, we are able to work in a manner that we are able to achieve nice, clean, consistent results. Now in this snippet, you're going to see me whipping in an upwards motion. Now the same fundamentals that I'm explaining here in this video still apply. As you can see, the spacing in between each whip is next to none, creating a smooth shade there for me. So that still applies whether I'm whipping up, down, right, or left. It doesn't really matter. Whichever direction I am whipping in, I'm still going to stick to the fundamentals. Make sure you're comfortable with the gear that you're using. Know the tones of inks that you're also using and applying. Be aware of where the dark areas need to be. Be aware of where the lighter areas are going to be, and the mids as well. Be aware of all of that. You want to be aware of the choices that you are also making upon shading. Have a plan. I do feel like having a plan when you are shading is probably one of the best approaches to take it, because you know why you're putting the shading where you are putting it. For me personally, this is why I love using 3-round liners, because I'm able to be real precise and exact with where I put my shading, using the correct tones of ink, pressures, and voltage matching my hand speed. So again, when those variables are aligned, I'm able to achieve consistent results with that specific configuration, and pretty much any configuration that I use, just changing some variables such as maybe voltage and or hand speed, even technique and or application. It's very important to be comfortable with the gear that you choose to use, and it's very important to know what results to expect upon using it as well. I create my videos in hopes to help you in a better direction, and I hope that you're able to take some information from here and apply it on your end. Now, if you have any questions about anything that you saw or heard throughout this video, I'm going to encourage you to drop a comment down below, and I will do my absolute best to assist you in the best possible direction. I also have social medias all under the same name as my YouTube channel. I have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I would truly appreciate the support on there as well. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for me and ring that bell, as I will be bringing more videos like this for you all. Thank you for tuning in yet again. You have a great day.